Well, good evening. Welcome to the couch. My name is Ama Pratt. Well, this week is the first week in March. What it means is that Friday is the 3rd of March, and Friday marks a very, very, very important calendar, a date in our calendar as Ghanaians, as Africans, and as peoples of the world. Friday is 6th March. Friday is our Independence Day. Now, so today, to commemorate that beautiful day, the book we are treating is one that is very, very special. This book, Kwame Nkrumah and the Dawn of the Cold War. Right? I hope the camera can, catch this. Kwame Nkrumah and the Dawn of Cold War, the West African National Secretariat. And this book is by Marika Sherwood. So this is the book that we are reviewing this evening. Please, 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 if you can, go grab yourself a copy. Very important book for everybody, every African, to read. Obviously, I can't do this by myself. And so to do this very important review of this very important book, I have with me Comrade Kambale Musavuli. You won't believe how they spelled your name. Hi, Kambale.
Hello.
I'm good, Kambale. Kambale happens to be a human rights activist. He's been fighting for the rights of the peoples of Africa, specifically Congo, where you are originally from, among other activities that hopefully we will get into. Welcome to the couch.
Thank you.
Again.
Second time.
Yes, third time actually.
Can keep up.
Okay, we also have with us Comrade Abdul-Rahim na Ninche. Yeah. Hi, Comrade.
Hi, Comrade.
Well, he is a student of Ghana Institute of Journalism. In fact, you're aspiring for a position.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed you will get it.
Hopefully,
welcome to the couch.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the couch. It's great to have you.
Same here.
Great to have you. Okay, Kambale, let's start with you. Let's talk about Marika Sherwood. Who is she?
I've read a few essays and writing by her. She's an Africanist. She's from the UK, of course. When someone hears Marika Sherwood, Jewish.
British, white.
Yeah.
Marika Sherwood.
Right? So she has an interesting life because she lived in Australia and experienced racism. So, and she saw how blacks were treated. And that's one of the things that changed her life, in saying that she needed to understand what is happening with the black people around the world and where racism comes, basically from her experience as a Jewish woman with the heritage. So she started doing studies in the she did studies in the UK. She spent decades in Ghana, traveling back and forth. She's also a teacher at the University of, I think it's the University of London. She has a desk there. But how she's known is she's worked with Akimadi a lot. Those two are the prime scholar on the history of Pan-Africanism from I'll say maybe the early 1900s to about the 1950s. They've written extensively on that. There is the latest book by Akimadi where he also referenced some of the work they've done together. Her focus around Ghana has helped in actually understanding what the young people of West Africa did to liberate this area, particularly the young man who was in Manchester, Kwame Nkrumah, who inspired many Africans to follow in his footsteps to liberate the countries from seeing what Ghana did in the late 1940s.
I mean, that's a beautiful history. So obviously we can understand her interests, on the content. Now let's talk about the book. I always like to start from outside before I enter the book. Do you find this appealing?
Yeah. I mean, who won't?
Is it catchy?
Yeah, it is for me, especially having Kwame Nkrumah on the front page. For me, right. it's even more appealing, and the coloring. And I think that the book largely speaks about the youth and how the youth championed the liberation of West Africa. And so if I watch the color, I don't know much about coloring, but the little I know with coloring, it appeals to the youth. And so for me, even from the back of the book, the front page and all that, it appeals to the very people I think the book is intended for.
Okay. Would you have changed the graphics? Would you have put another picture, Kambale?
Oh, if I had to choose, based on the context of the title, I would have put maybe a picture of the work in the Secretariat. Right? The
people working on ones.
Yes, the West African National Secretariat. Like, who were there? Who were the people who worked with him? I know the Padmore and the Dubois, they all did a lot of work in the Secretariat. And to have maybe a picture of these young people working in the secretariat could also be very appealing. And it inspire young people to say, hey, they did it in the 20s and 30s. I think Kwame Nkrumah probably was the oldest around that time. But there were young people in that time who said there is no reason why we shouldn't fight for human dignity for our people, not just on the African continent, but the entire African diaspora. And they created something that actually was the engine for transformation of Africa from the 50s to the 60s, when we start getting more countries becoming independent.
Wow. Okay. So for you, perhaps that focal point, you know, of everybody else would have been more. But I mean, this works for me. Yeah. Like he said.
Yeah, I think the focus is more on Nkrumah than the West African National Secretariats.
But for inspiration and aspiration, I understand what he's saying, to see young people, you know, to get down the table, working, you know, because it's a very important organization, those ones. Okay, so let's talk about interest in the book. How were you introduced to this book?
Oh, wow. I was introduced to the book about a week ago. I received a copy 24 hours ago. Right? But I was very interested by it because just the way it was framed, especially what is happening now in the world, there is a lot more discussion around communism around the world and socialism around the world. And I sing a title about Kwame Nkrumah that talks about the dawn of an era where communism was prominent in the mobilization. I was curious to know, what is it that's interesting in this book? And as I open and I start reading, I'm already very fascinated by it.
I know.
We must know.
I know.
The central thing that I got from the things that I've read is sometimes we don't realize the leaders and the ideology that they had, and sometimes we minimize the impact. These young people with an ideology that were politically clear were able to inspire others, organize and mobilize. In 1960, 12 other African countries became independent. It was through that ideology.
It's amazing. I think this book is really inspirational, and I want us to take our time and get there and actually talk about that. You know, how were you introduced to this book?
Yeah, I think I first saw it in your office.
Okay, great. Well, this book was given to me. You know, can I say this? Okay, let's move on. Right, but I was introduced to the book, and I love it. Right, I totally love it. Okay, so should we start with her style? Then we can talk about the themes. I think the themes are the main meat of our conversation today. But let's start with her style of writing. What do you think? How do you find this book? I'll start. I find her style easy as compared to other books about Kwame Nkrumah, or books by Kwame Nkrumah, or books around the themes that she tries to address. Other reads are hard. And I was saying this, you know, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, about how people pick up books like this and they have interest to read, but sometimes because the wording and it's so hard to digest and all of that, people sort of lose interest. This one, you can't say the same. This is a very easy read for me, and I really, truly appreciate that about this. And I want everybody to read this. I want everybody to read this book. How do you feel about her style?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, because largely I think that she even states in the book that she tries to use newspapers as her source of information. She's trying to analyze what's really happened. And so even in cases where she couldn't find, there's a clear scenario, when she was speaking about Sierra Leone at some point in time, she made clear that she couldn't find any newspaper concerning what she was writing about. And with wedding, when I first read Kwame Nkrumah's Dark Days in Ghana, really, I thought this was too much philosophy. And then when I read his class struggles, I felt I had to ask people to explain what some of the things.
Most of the books are like that.
But when I read this, I felt this is probably my first Nkrumah book that is easy to go. And I think that more importantly, because it's for the youth, and it highlights what people like him and young people like students like him did during those days. I think that once it's aimed for the youth, and the youth really nowadays don't like to read things with big wordings. And so I think that once she's able to know her target audience clearly, and then she's able to speak in a language that they can really understand. And I think, so far what I've read in the book, I enjoy, and I think I really don't need any other person to explain to me.
You don't need to read it over and
I'm able to understand
again,
it simply,
or have a dictionary by you. Kambale, what do you think about his style?
I'm a footnote nerd, right? So the way she wrote it, I think there is a balance. There is the simplicity into it, but she references everything she shares, and that shows the deepness into her thinking of writing the book. Yes, I will tell the story. She's an historian, but I will make sure that I give you the reference. So I was going back and forth, reading when she referenced something, looking at the footnote. Is that something that's actually accurate? And she's sourcing a lot of document that's been declassified, from U.S. government document to British government document and others. And then she will take not the entire page of the classified cables, but a section that supports her comment. And it's good to see it. You know, you
very concise, isn't it? Very concise and precise, straight to the point.
Like that style.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about the themes in the book. Let's talk about the themes in the book. Who will go first?
Well, I think that I am more interested in I think from page 43 to page 47 of the book. That talks about.
You want to read something else?
No, not really, but I'm sure when I get I will, because I love this because it talks about the formation, how it was really formed, and like I've said,
what was formed?
How the West African National Secretariat was formed.
Okay.
It talks about the formation and then the aims of the group, and my interest largely is in the fact that I am a student, and I see young people on streets. You speak to young people and they think, okay, we cannot do anything.
3.
Yeah, exactly.
Formation and aims of one.
Exactly. And I want to just read the aims of the West African National Secretariat. And one, it says supply information with a view to realizing a West African front for United West African National Independence. The second one talks about educate the people. The third one, foster spirit of national unity. And the last one, engineer the formation of an all-West African National Congress. And when you read from the beginning of the book, it talks about the fact that they had gone for the Pan-African Congress, and they had seen the aim of the Pan-African Conference, and they realized that, look, that was a bigger dream. And they thought that they saw West Africa as one nation, and they thought that they could just, and these were and I want to emphasize on the word students. These were students who
like yourself.
Yes. And we go for conferences too, and many times when we go for conferences, we come back, we are not able to understand what really happened. And these people went for a conference, listened to whatever was happening, and they were able to look at their situation as a people, and they decided that, look, let's come up with this movement, and then this is what we want to achieve. And the most important part for me is to supply information. And in the current world we live in, we are told that information is the most important thing. And so if they needed information as far back as 1945, and I think more than ever, the youth now need that information. That's why I love that side of the book.
I really appreciate what you're saying, perhaps because it's coming from you as students, you know, and instead of bring it home directly.
Exactly.
Because all of us go for conferences, all of us go for events, and somehow we go to these things, come home, and leave it there. We leave whatever whatever information, whatever experience, we just leave it there at the venue and come back and continue with life the way we've always known it.
There's a funny part of it though. When I was in level 100, I'm someone who loves to read more on feminism and all that. So there was a conference at one university. It's a women something, and so I went. And then there was a speaker. And I said, if this speaker is the one going to speak on feminism, then I think that we might never achieve what we want to achieve. So I was interested because I felt that the speaker herself probably did not understand what feminism stood for. And that feminism is not a battle for only women, but goes beyond them. And so for me, then again, if you look at the kind of people who spoke at that Pan-African conference and what really it sought to achieve, you realize that they just didn't want to do a program for the sake of a program. They did a program that they thought would impact the youth. And then the question falls back, is it only about the fact that when we go to such conferences now, we don't understand, or sometimes the kind of people that are chosen to speak about the conference don't even understand where we are coming from. And so they cannot even tell us where we are going. And so I think the problem is two-way. The students themselves probably go sometimes and are not serious to understand what's happening. And sometimes the organizers themselves are people who benefit from the kind of system we have now. So the kind of education they want to give you at the conference is not an education that would liberate you. It's an education that will keep you still with the same people that are taking advantage of you.
Absolutely. But I'm very, happy about what you pick out, applying yourself or allowing, I mean, when you're inspired by something, to go all the way with it,
Exactly.
Because we are the only agents of change we have.
Yeah.
It's just us.
Exactly.
Nobody will come from anywhere to do anything for you. It's us. And so once you go through something, like an inspirational conference such as the one that they went to, and at a time like they did, then it's important that you sort of allow that. I talk too much, Kambale.
No,
What's your theme?
I want to touch on that too, because I think it's important for us to frame it, that conference. Africans from around the globe decided in 1945, at the end of World War II, there were young Africans who decided to meet in Manchester. Right? It wasn't similar conference that we do, because the conferences that we go to, there are no resolutions. No. You go, you hear, and then you go home. That conference had particular resolutions specifically talking about what we need to do about the Caribbeans, what we need to do about Black Americans, what we need to do about a united Africa under a socialist banner. And all these resolutions from 1945 up until Kwame Nkrumah became the head of state of Ghana, you can see that these resolutions were moved forward to be implemented. So they came out of this conference energized. The question should be, when we organize our conferences, do we have resolutions saying that people came to this conference, we are all, after this conference, deciding that we are going to advance the class struggle in this way? If we're not doing that, we are way far from them. As the Comrade has shared, they were young like us, but we're not doing what they're doing. So where is the gap? What has happened to us that's making our brain not be as active or, let's say, energized to do something? And that goes to one of the chapters in the book when they talked about the scholarships.
There you go. You want to read it out to us, Kambale?
No, there is a chapter on the scholarship. I think it's around 159 probably. Right, where there you go. So 159, where the United States is providing technical and scholarship to young Africans. And they said to foster pro-American sentiment, the U.S. government began to offer more and more scholarships and place at American universities for African students. Various forms of technical assistance also began to be provided. After all, the best way to prevent Africans being lured by the enticement which the communists may offer was by creating an environment in which African peoples will feel that their aspiration can best be served by continued association and cooperation with the free world. This is happening now, and this is actually a direct quote from one of the cables, and she's quoting also the cable, from the State Department, that there was this mentality that we must gain the minds of the young Africans. These young Africans somehow heard the term communism. And by hearing the term communism, they start mobilizing against colonialism. Because that's what they were mobilizing against, right? Self-government, sovereignty. Through communism, they understood how they were exploited and say, we need a United States of Africa under the banner of socialism. We need to liberate African countries. We need to figure out what unify us against this oppressor that's taking our resources, that's making us subjects, second class, third class citizens in our own land. And that was the sentiment. But fighting to become free, fighting to become independent is now being labeled as, we need to stop you and put something else in your brain so that you cannot free yourself. So that's also something that we have to look, because the things have not changed much. Decades later, after this happened in the 40s, it is happening now. How many scholarships are being given to African students to go study abroad? University of Legon, of Ghana, Legon is one of the premier universities in this country that can educate Africans. Do you have to have an Ivy League education to be able to run the country? Not necessarily. But when you go and learn different economic models and you come and implement that, what's going to happen? Wale Adam Smith. That's my inside one. As a Congolese living in Ghana, I was like, what is Wale Adam Smith?
That was funny. I didn't expect that. But it's very interesting that, we are here, we find ourselves on the theme of education because it's very important. I was referencing my conversation with Comrades Kambale and Eunice about xenophobia. Yeah. And I remember very well Kambale saying that it goes back to the kind of education they have as kids, where they are taught deliberately, systematically, to aspire more towards the West than towards the continent. And so her position was that the average South African had no connection with the African continent or the other citizens of it. They don't know about our music, they don't know about, our culture, nothing. And so there's no connection to the Ghanaian man or the Congolese man or the Nigerian man whatsoever. But however, they are systematically made to feel a connection to the West. Very deliberately. Let's talk about education here in Ghana. I had the opportunity to sit with our second lady. And she referenced, because I have a toddler, it hit home. She said, how do we teach our children the alphabets? A is for apple, B is for ball, I is for igloo. What's an igloo?
I don't know.
Exactly.
And I went to the system.
Exactly. What's an igloo? Why till today do we learn about summer? What's summer to a Ghanaian? And these are realities. So, scholarships, and this is shocking. Kambale permits me to read it again. And here I'll just come towards the end. After all, the best way to prevent Africans being lured by the enticements which the communists may offer was by creating an environment in which African peoples will feel that their aspirations can best be served by continued association and cooperation with the free world. So this is not a freebie.
Yeah.
This is not take scholarships and come to our country and be exposed. No.
But you see the contradiction. That sentence of the free world is being said in the 40s when Africans are being colonized.
Of course.
But they want us to be associated with the free world.
If the free world is such a great thing, why don't you give us our freedom? Yeah. My goodness. And so you take a scholar, and I think this is where the term woke, staying woke should be very important. For instance, personally, I've had some Western education, I would admit, right? But then as you engage, I think you should be aware. Yeah. As you are engaging, you should be aware. And you should stay woke, essentially, to know what's coming at you, and filter through whatever is being thrown at you and appreciating the context in which all of that can situate. That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. And
for me, that's you make mention of context about what we learn, and that's probably why I think that I love reading books by someone like Chinua Achebe, and I think that it should be forced on our students, because the days I was reading, I read Wole Soyinka's books too, and when I read Wole Soyinka's book or Chimamanda Ngozi, I'm like, no, I can't feel the setting. So Chimamanda probably could be talking about the summer, the winter. And as a boy from Bimbila, I don't know anything called summer.
But she also talks about it.
Yeah, she does. She does. Yeah. But when I read, and so the point I'm just making is that the kind of books we read, and then he makes we reference the book that everything we see is not an accident. It is deliberate.
No.
We've not even got to a point where they're no longer giving us scholarships. We are giving ourselves scholarships to go and learn there.
Yes.
And that's how serious it is. They're no longer forcing us. They're not saying come for it.
Yes.
We are now using our money to go and learn there. Yeah. And that's very serious. And so before our brothers and sisters who go there, and nobody's saying it's a bad thing, but before they come back, they don't see the world like we all see it. And so they don't see they're disconnected. They don't see
here, like they said, they make sure that your aspirations and that's policy. That's the direct policy. That your aspirations as an African student schooling in the West is towards it's for you to feel that you are somehow tied
to the free world,
to their system. Yeah. My goodness. Okay, so let's look at another theme. I don't think we've exhausted the theme of education, though. There's so much more to talk about, from our childhood till let's look at what we have thought about in social studies. Yeah. What do our books say about colonialism?
Exactly.
And how factual
are they?
is the information that we get, as kids growing up. My friend was just telling me her son goes to one of these American international schools locally, and she was telling me about how the son insisted on going to America over the weekend because they had been taught about something. I've forgotten what. Something over and over and over again. The son wanted to go and see it. So we're talking about a toddler. We're not talking about this is a preschooler. So imagine, it's ridiculous. It's what they've done to our educational system. The real thing is not bad enough. Now all of us are pushing our kids into these private international schools with American curriculum, with British curriculum, and like you said, now we are not going over there to get systematically corrupted. We are bringing it onto ourselves. My goodness. And all of us are victims, right?
And even schools,
or willing victims.
Schools with no international students call themselves international.
I'm telling you.
So that they can get people to go in school.
The more international, the better.
Exactly.
I mean, I think there should be not just a national discussion around what is in school. It has to be a continental discussion. There is, I strongly believe, there is a war to take control of the minds of the Africans, where the African will not sit and say, this is what I'm deciding for the destiny of my people, of my life. And it's coming not just from the West, it's from all around the world, because Africa has the last remnant resources for the world. So they must come to the continent. But we don't question the curriculum. So having that discussion, not just nationally, that someone in the Congo should be able to understand the history of Ghana. What did Kwame Nkrumah do for the land called Ghana to become what it is? How he went and spoke to different people from north to north, bringing regions together for the Republic of Ghana. It's fascinating to me as a Congolese to hear that the work that was done to make Ghana what it is. And when I'm hearing on the news the discussion that there are people who want to take a part of Ghana because of some colonial lines or pre-colonial lines, it doesn't make sense if you understand the work that young people at the time, they were not even looking at Ghana as a nation. No. They were looking at West Africa as a nation with a West African National Secretariat. The whole regional integration. And we benefit from that. Ghanaians do not know that. Me with a Congolese passport, I cannot go to Benin without a visa. With your Ghanaian passport, you can go in West Africa, in the ECOWAS region, which is your passport that you don't need a visa. And they were envisioning that in the West African National Secretariat.
They didn't even have independence at the time. My goodness. Right, they didn't even have independence at the time.
So how we tell our story differently is important. Getting this material not to be taught. Instead of saying that, when Queen Elizabeth came to Ghana and danced with Kwame Nkrumah, that's not important.
Nobody cares.
How did we get to independence? And I hope March 6th, more people will get a chance to read the book, understand the struggle for Ghana to become independent and how Ghana became an inspiration for many African countries.
Also, and that's something that one of my producers said. He said that, isn't it interesting that every time the West offers us assistance in terms of education, and in this specific instance, he referenced the comprehensive sexual education. He said, why that? Meanwhile, there are children in the North who still do not have tables and chairs. So if you want to do something great for our educational, why not do the basics? Why not give schools buildings? Why not provide us with chairs? Why try to touch our curriculum? Why is that where you want to go and spend your money? It's so interesting. All right, let's talk about another thing. Oh, you have something.
Like you were saying, it's always a battle of the mind. And right from my first encounter with ideologies of socialism, capitalism, was in senior high school. And so my lecturer was teaching, and then we're learning government actually. And then she got to a point where she was talking about Nkrumah. And for the first time in my life, I was hearing a Ghanaian say that Nkrumah was terrible. So I was like, what does this mean? And so
that's a Ghanaian teacher in a classroom.
In a classroom. So I've started reading about it. And one of the questions for me, and one of the things that most students are still learning today, in our books, we have topics that talks about benefits of colonialism.
Oh my goodness.
And so
the benefits of
we're talking about, so we say everything has a disadvantage and an advantage. but even let's assume it has a disadvantage. What's robbed us of our dignity? Would we be talking about benefits? And so you have Ghanaians, so you not blame young Ghanaians who say that, look, it looks like we're better off under colonialism. And even on campus, I hear lots of students say this, and their greatest consolation is in South Africa. And I say, you only know Johannesburg. You only probably hear about Cape Town. You don't hear about the Sharks, or there's a name they call it, and all those things. And so, like he said rightly, it's a battle of the mind. And as we speak now, we don't own it, and we have a lot of our youth, and that's even what makes it dangerous. That during their time, they had no independence, but these were young people who had gone outside to learn, but they didn't allow the enjoyment in Manchester, the enjoyment in London to stop them from coming back. Even during those enjoyments, they're still thinking about how to come back and solve the situations here. Let's look at now. Most of our people that are going back don't want to come back, and even those that are telling us that, look, I have a friend who tells me that, look, if Nkrumah could not solve our problems, then he's not sure we can ever solve our problems again. Yeah.
But we have our work cut out for us, don't we, as young people on the continent today. How do we change this? How do we get into that curriculum and take out that, I had choice words, but I'll save it, where we are talking about the benefits of colonialism? How do we change that? How do we erase that from our textbooks? The benefits of colonialism.
The people will have to erase it. No, me as an individual, I will not have enough power to even challenge the status quo to change that. People first have to understand that this exists in our curriculum and that this is not right. So the work of awareness, making people to understand the contradiction of the society first, is what's going to mobilize them to want to change. Because if you don't, I'm sure you've seen videos of someone who's sitting on fire and not feeling the fire. No, it's possible that you could literally be on fire and not feel that you are being
gymnastics, they put it in your mouth.
Right. So that's the state that we are in, that we are being burned alive. We don't know that we are being burned alive. So it's how to be able to tell people, this is the condition that's around you. If you don't watch out, your skin will be completely peeled off with the fire, and you probably won't be alive anymore. The moment the person knows that, then they can mobilize. That's a small analogy to try to explain how to do it. But concretely, all the areas where people are getting free HSS, why aren't we going there and doing our own education? Because I do know, even with free education, there are people who don't have access to education. So there need to be a model of popular education where we are going to the people, providing information, specifically around the conditions, and helping whatever the community that we are going to be in understanding the contradiction and working with them to address it. And Ghanaians have done it. I think today, right, there is a protest in a region of Ghana where people are mobilizing. So Ghanaians know how to mobilize. It just takes you a little longer to do it.
I think it's taking us a little too long. It's taking us a little too long. Yeah. Benefits of colonialism, my goodness.
And even if you read the book, I think the first 4 pages, Nkrumah writes a letter back home, I think, to the people who are leading the struggle, I think the Aboriginal rights protection movement and all that. And the one of the replies he gets, he says, look, the young people here are not serious. And for me, that is what really got me interested in the book. And just this morning, I was discussing with Comrade Kambale, and that was one of the questions. We were listening to Marcus Garvey's speech, and then he was saying, look, this is a speech that was delivered over 100 years ago. Do the youth today care about that? And so the question again, like you said, are the youth today, do they really understand what's happening? And so you and I, we have a duty, just like these young men sat in Manchester and London and realized that even though our people were being bent and they didn't know about it, and they needed a solution, and the solution was on them. And so now you and I, the solution is on us because we know, and we have read and realized that the kind of curriculum we are practicing will not solve the problems. So when we want to do, in my final year, for instance, I think that one of my research topics should tackle one of these things.
Absolutely.
So we have over 4,000 students on GIJ campus. If 2,000 of them decide to do research topics on things that will impact the African system, the African curriculum, it will help us. But most students are doing thesis on how Facebook impacts student life. And so if I'm Zuckerberg and I find that a Ghanaian student has done a thesis on this, of course, he will pick it up, find a way of making sure that it benefits him, because he's a businessman, he wants to make money. Other than doing thesis and project work for Facebook, for Instagram for free, why don't we pick up the Ghanaian curriculum? Colonialism, has it benefited us? And then we do a proper thesis on that. The current, let's talk about the number of people we are sending out to go and learn. What benefit do we get back? And all these things, if we're able to do them, and that will start from you and I, because we don't have power, then ultimately we'll not have to fight, start petitioning authorities, start telling them the problem, because genuinely, some of the people we've put in authority don't know there's a problem. And like you said, they are leading us into the fire, but don't even know there's a fire there. So we must take this up and do it ourselves.
All of this would have to start from here, like Kambale said. It's a mind, you know, and its orientation. And perhaps, and here, I'll speak about the allure of capitalism, you know, the fact that, and I said this to Comrade Cosmos when he was here, the fact that it's always about that dream, you know, if I write this, and Mark sees it, probably takes interest in me, you know, what's in it for me, sort of. So as a people, our aspirations are all wrong and warped. We've been made to also think individual and not community and not, you know, society. And so we feel that once I make it, I mean, that's okay. And there's an allure of a great, wonderful world where I've made it and I'm rich and me, you know, which will never happen.
Exactly.
Because it's just a mirage. It's really, truly will never, ever, ever happen. The chances of you being, what's his name, Steve Jobs, are very slim. Very, very slim. So perhaps our orientation and taking pride in the things that Kwame Nkrumah took pride in, these people who created once, you know, taking pride in the things, society, people, consciousness, these things, these great and wonderful things that we say that sound so cliche, but really should be the truth. All right, let's talk some other things in the book. Kambale.
I mean, I think the theme that's fascinating to me is this is throughout the book. Sherwood is showing their work and also sharing the challenges that these young people are facing. It's fascinating to me how long the CIA was following Kwame Nkrumah. Very fascinating.
The CIA.
Before even he was head of state, before even the Manchester conference, they already had their eyes on him. Who is this young person who dreams of a united Africa when he's from Ghana? Because we have all these colonies, but there is this young African who actually dreams, I'm a Ghanaian, but I want to see the continent actually free. That becomes a problem for a capitalist world, because as colonies are developing, taking the resources from the colonies to rebuild Europe after World War II, you can't have Africans taking control of their destiny. So anyone who has that, you see that, I think it's around page 155, when they start talking about the CIA, and some of the racist comment from the cables, where they'll say that around French Africa, you know, you have the savage and semi-savages who are mobilizing. You know, I'm paraphrasing one of the quotes. I said, who in the CIA is calling an African savage and semi-savage?
I'll read something to you. It says here, it says, Britain wanted not only to win the war, but was fearful of losing her colonies. After all, they supplied Britain's wealth, as was admitted by Labour MP Stratford Cripps. The reality is that the industrial life of this country has been built up on the basis of colonial markets and colonial sources of raw material. Monopoly markets and monopoly supplies of raw material give a very greatly increased possibility of drawing profits from our industry. Cut off from our colonial supplies and markets, our present industrial structure would collapse. Did Britain's leaders foresee the possibility of having to grant independence to her colonies? Conservative Prime Minister Winston Churchill expressed his attitude towards natives very clearly. When Gold Coasters were openly campaigning for self-government, he stated that it was crazy to give the vote to naked savages. Lord Cranborne, the colonial secretary, argued that we all know in our hearts of hearts that most of the colonies, especially Africa, will probably not be fit for complete independence for centuries. There were hopes that the Labour Party, elected to power in July 1945, would have a different attitude. But this was not so. And within a few months, the party was severely criticized by many newspapers. The West African Pilot, to cite just one example, argued on 5th April 1946 that the present policy of the Labour government in matters relating to Africa is even worse than that of the Tories. We were naked savages, Kambale, just to add to what you were saying.
Yeah. And the people who say that may be alive today. Because it's not long ago. We're talking about the 40s. They may be alive today and they have that mentality. But no matter what they do, the power struggle that we have is around control of our resources and our lands.
Of course.
Right? They can be as racist as they can, but they love our resources for some reason. They do everything to control it. So our battle...
I have something about that as well. I have something about that as well. Yeah. Oh, I can't find it. I underlined it. Yeah. I cannot find it. But yeah.
But our battle is really to take control of our resources. And that was the dream of Kwame Nkrumah. That was the dream of the Fifth Pan-African Congress in Manchester. That we needed to mobilize across the world, understanding that the African world does not end with the African continent, that we have our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, we have our brothers and sisters in Latin America. Brazil has one of the largest African population after Nigeria, right? We have over 100 million Africans like you and me who are in Brazil. Same also in North America, we also have Africans. That the African world as it is bigger than us, but the continental struggle of liberating the continent was essential for us to do anything. And he was clear. Why should we exploit our resources for their benefit? No, we are going to exploit it for the benefit of the people of the continent. And after we extract it, we exploit it, the profit of those resources is going to be used for the continent. How do we know? Today, electricity across West Africa, in some of the countries, including Ghana, I think Burkina Faso, and some other countries in the region, they get electricity from you. Something that Kwame Nkrumah built back then with a vision of what it is required to use our own dam to provide electricity to Africans.
For the continent. Yeah. For the continent. The CIA. The almighty CIA. Or you want to dodge this bullet?
I don't know. It's not bullets. It's a bullet that I can't dodge. Even if I dodge, it's a stray bullet, and it's possible I can touch me. And this is a conversation I just had with, I think 2 days ago. We're discussing the Nkrumah factor and then the attempt to deliberately take him off our history and all that. And one of my friends said, look, the CIA factor was just, it really wasn't possible and all that. And despite the several things I was showing him and all that. And you see, one of the interesting things is that it's not always clear. So if I come and I'm stealing from you, or I'm beating you and I come clearly and I'm doing that, you can see me. But if I call your brother and tell him and lie to your brother that you've done this, and so he should rather beat you on my behalf, then you might probably not be seeing my face, but your brother will be beating you, and you end up fighting.
Any thief that announces he's coming to thief is not effective. Let's just understand that.
Exactly. So for me,
let's just understand that.
The CIA thing is a big problem, and to think that the classified documents of the USA, and in some books she talks about the fact that she even wrote to the UK government, and then they told her clearly that even though they were declassified documents, but they could not be given to her.
Listen, I read that part to you. I like to read. Please allow me. Let me find that page for you.
I think it was at the beginning of the book. I was really surprised when I read that.
Okay, so there we go. Here I am, Here I am, only giving outlines of this history, and only to what I think was the beginning of the Cold War in Africa in 1948. Full accounts, even just of the Gold Coast, would fill many books. I did not have access to all the West African newspapers and archives while researching once. It is important to emphasize that the British government has still not released all the archives on once, and anti-colonial, pro-independence activists, even for 1945 to 1948. One of my requests for the release of some files in 2016 prompted the following response. we have this. I wanted to do that in my British accent, but let's keep the Ghanaian accent. We have decided that this information should be withheld. Section 27(2) of the Act exempts information if it is confidential information obtained from a state other than the UK or from an international organization.
It's a declassified document.
Yes.
But the information had to be... So it tells you that if information as far back as 1945 is still seen as detrimental to the development of these countries...
In
2016 and all that, it tells you that we are... And these countries... And he tells you that some of these people are still alive. They still hold these mentalities. They still hold all these beliefs. And I was watching a news item where the US government was warning Ethiopia about the dam they were building. And one of the comments read that does the UK have an extension of their territory into Ethiopia? Why is the US government interested in a dam being built in Ethiopia? So it tells you. And when the president visited Switzerland recently, he made it clear that Ghana wants to be not just a producer of cocoa, but become a processor of cocoa and all those things. And I was surprised because I said that these are words that we've always known people like Nkrumah and all those people believe in. And the president, I hope, believes in that. But the president and many other people know why it cannot be done. Because there are people who've made sure that it is deliberate, that a country like Switzerland that does not grow even a single tree of cocoa would be the world's largest producer of chocolate.
Listen, Africa is a resource hub. Raw material hub, including the human beings. Let's just accept. Let's just accept that as what is, and that knowledge and that understanding, that acceptance, I think, is what would help us liberate ourselves.
Exactly.
It's the only way. If we just accept how we are seen, and here today I also reference this argument between the cat and the mouse. If we appreciate our place in all of this, I think that understanding is what will help us. We like to kid ourselves and think we are equal partners, sometimes.
Exactly.
We are doing bilateral trade, whatever with what. We just need to appreciate that.
Exactly.
Listen, there's nothing bilateral going on here.
Even if you read
they are just resource.
Yeah. Exactly. There's
raw material.
Tiny quotes. And then he talks about when democracy says for the rule of, I think democracy talks about by the people, for the people, and of the people. The question we should be asking is, which people? And I think that's one of the things we should be talking about when we talk about the fact that we are having bilateral discussions and all those things. We should be very clear on asking when we say bilateral, what do we mean by bilateral? When clearly we know that one particular party is putting in more and getting less than what they're
clearly
putting
an
in.
agenda. I mean, even the siting of our roads, our railway lines, even the airports, and it's here. I've forgotten which page, but it's right here. There was direct, deliberate policy to site all these things strategically, just to move the resource direct from source straight to be shipped out to where they feel it's needed. And so it's not as if somebody is being benevolent by building a road for you, or by building a railway line for you, or by building an airport for you. It's in his interest. Permanent friends, permanent interest, always in his interest. I think it's time we take a break. What do you think? Let's take a break.
Sure.
Let's take. When we come back, we read the messages and we conclude on some of the themes, right?
Yeah,
okay, viewers. So we will take a quick break at this point, just in case you are just joining the show. Today we are reviewing Kwame Nkrumah and the Dawn of the Cold War, the West African National Secretariat. This is a book by Marika Sherwood. This is a book we are reviewing. We are doing this because we are very close to Sith March, and we need to have these conversations. And where else do we start than from some of these books? So we will take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'll read your messages and we'll conclude on our themes. Stay with us.
Hey, Bukuya. The thing on how the pressure to me to start. What song come from? You said the people na ya na saw ya rubo. They said when you Joe what? What to how we soon here. My nyo sanka between me kaba. Ma. We yare the menya no dro. And nti na mama to nkra bro se bra no. Eh na me be say fin ya go. Kwese wa mama ye ma hye. Kofi chira. Wa yasina ya na yo ya.
Oh, it's incredible! Bang on target!
Welcome back to the show. This is The Couch. My name is Ama Pratt. This evening we are reviewing, this all-important book. I'm doing this with Comrade Kambale Musavuli, and of course, Comrade Abdul-Rahim Ninche.
Yeah.
Good stuff. You had something on education again.
Yeah, I mean, because we touched on it, and I felt that it would be important, as the West African National Secretariat had publications, and what Sherwood did was she added some quotes from the publication that they shared across the region, and one of them is a writing by Kwame Nkrumah in 1947, actually, Education and Nationalism in West Africa. And Kwame Nkrumah argues that education in West Africa should produce a new class of educated Africans imbued with the culture of the West, but nevertheless attached to their own environment. They should demand the powers of self-determination and independence to determine the advancement of their own country. So they were clear that there may be people around who may have Western education and others educated there, but their education needed to be based on the reality of the country, rather than saying that we want to do things like it's done in Paris, London, or Washington, that we need to do things as that is right for our environment. Already in 1947, in the Secretariat, they were writing these type of articles that was distributed all across West Africa.
Amazing stuff. Let's bring in our viewers at this point. This one says, where can one buy one? His name is John Aqua in Manchester. Do you know Kambale? Where can one get this book?
I mean, the publisher has a publishing company here in Ghana. It's a sub-Saharan publisher. It's in Legon, in Accra. And I'm sure Marika Sherwood can also be reached through her school at the University of London. So it is available in Ghana. And it's also available through contacting her directly at the university.
And she was just in Ghana.
Yeah, I think that she did an event too, right?
Yeah, she launched the book here in Ghana.
So the book is distributed here through the publisher. I think I can repeat the name of the publisher.
Try the big bookshop. Try the Legon bookshop, for instance. Right?
Because this one is in Legon. It's actually say Legon. Sub-Saharan publisher.
In Legon. So try there, John. Let's see. Right? Okay. This one says, good evening, honorables. That is a book I am praying to make time and visit the Legon bookshop to purchase next week, after having it recommended by Uncle Kwesi on Alaji and Alaji. Oh, nice. But come to think of it, all who live with the Nkrumah philosophy, like the late Professor John Evans Atta Mills, will die paupers. His was not to amass state wealth. he elected not to take per diems for his official travels. Since his passing, not a single case of corruption has been alleged against him. And yet, till date, he is vilified for his patriotism. Capitalism is evil. His name is Albert in Adenta. Albert, I agree with you. This one says, hi, I'm Richard Selom Fialu Kwame, and I love your show. Thank you. Until our African leaders come to the realization that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is God for Africa and try to follow his ideology, we as Africans and Ghanaians will still lag behind. Thank you, Richard, for your message. This one says, hi, I'm loving the show. It's very educative. They did to Nkrumah what they did to Malcolm X. Please continue to give the youth more information. I'm Yaira from Tajiwu in the Volta region. Thank you so much, Yaira. This one says, great discussion. God bless you all. Please, now, our problem is all about the right leaders. Africa doesn't have right leadership. That is why everything is wrong. But we see it to be right. His name is Carl in East Legon. Carl, thank you for your message. This one says, good evening, Ama. Nobody can destroy Kwame Nkrumah's legacy. You are doing a great job for Mother Ghana. I am watching you live from Kaswa, Obomu Road, Akakpo, Ankara. Thank you so much, Akakpo, Ankara, for your message. Okay, right. The other messages I've seen, not on topic, so, you know, I want you to stay on topic. This one says, please, how can I get a copy of the book to buy? I'm in Akachi in the Volta region. Well, try contacting the publishers, you know, and I'm not too sure if the book is in the Volta region yet, but it's definitely in Accra, it's in Legon, you know, the publishers are listed in the book. So, yeah, see about Legon. I'm sure you get a copy there in the Legon bookshop, right?
There is a point, you know, every time I always hear it, I get a little airy when we talk about leaders. We always forget that leaders come from the people. So those quote-unquote leaders who are making the deals with the West, who are exploiting our land with the West, do not come from the people. You know, they may have good intentions in the past, but they use shortcuts to get there. And I always make the comparison to a great leader who has passed away. His name is Hugo Chavez. The reason why I always talk about Hugo Chavez is, you know, after visiting Venezuela and seeing like the will of the Venezuelan people, I was like, it was never about Chavez. The people themselves believe in the revolution, the Bolivarian revolution, and they're the one who fought for him.
I mean, they dictate the kind of leadership that you give them. You know that these people will not take this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then a good example to actually test this theory that I just presented is Hugo Chavez is the only president in the world who survived a coup d'etat by the United States within 48 hours. They did a coup d'etat. They took him out of the palace. He was even going to be killed by the generals who took him. When the population found out about 5 to 6 hours after, the population went out in the street. They mobilized. Their mobilization was so strong within 48 hours. Those who were going to kill Chavez, they split. So there was one group of the army with the people and the other with those doing the coup. And they literally released him. And he came back to the palace. And you see the mass, right? And the same reality is now. You know,
The will of the people.
So the people are the ones who create the leader. The people have to embody those values. When we hear the values within what Dr. Kwame Nkrumah shared, he was amongst the people. And we have to embrace that. The moment we are Nkrumahist and we are living that, naturally, we will have a leader who will come and become the president because he came from us and change the airport to Accra International Airport so that it reflects the values of the people. If we don't have that, we will see decisions and wonder why are our leaders making
Who are
decisions.
these people? Where did they come from? Like, has this person lived in Ghana? Like, if I find somebody who vilifies Kwame Nkrumah, I just wonder about you. Like, when did you drop?
Exactly.
When did you drop? When did you drop? Now, my theme that I want to speak, and you know how we talk about Western propaganda?
Yes.
We talk about that all the time. And it might seem like isolated incidents or individuals' efforts. I mean, Western propaganda. But it's fascinating for me that in this book you realize that it's actual state policy. In fact, rumor mongering, and I had a laugh. Like, kokonsa, essentially, things that we do here for free, like, talking to your friend, gossip, that's policy that was used against us as African people. Rumor mongering, actual rumor mongering, it's here, I can't find the page, I was trying to find the page, I couldn't. Actual rumor mongering was used against us. And I want to read just bits and pieces, of that. And here I could talk of policies like divide and rule. Divide and rule. And something like the Truman Doctrine. Let me read a little bit about the Truman Doctrine, and this is not in the book, this is good old Google. Good old Google gave me some insights into the Truman Doctrine. Oh, I found that page. How did I lose it? Sorry. Give me a second, please. Oh, dear. Dear, forgive me. Because I found it fascinating that even on Google, there were two separate definitions for what the Truman Doctrine is, and you'll be amazed at how different they are. Okay, this one says, the Truman Doctrine, 1947. Truman, that's the name of the president at the time, established that the United States would provide political, military, and economic assistance to all democratic nations under threat from external or internal authoritarian forces. This seems innocent, right? Seems like a great thing. I mean, if the United States wants to provide political, military, economic assistance to democratic nations under threat from external or internal authoritarian force, that's a great thing. So the U.S. is only trying to be a big brother that's going to help, other other nationalists or states, maintain their independence. However, look at this other definition. This one says, the Truman Doctrine was an American foreign policy whose stated purpose was to counter Soviet geopolitical expansion during the Cold War. It was announced to Congress by President Harry S. Truman on March 12, 1947, and further developed on July 4, 1948, when he pledged to contain threats in Greece and Turkey. Now, this is not innocent. This is selfish interest 101. Pure and simple. If it's an American foreign policy with a stated purpose to counter Soviet geopolitical expansion during the Cold War. So this is, no, communism will not win, we will win.
Yeah. But then, even in that context, for the interest of whom? Because if you look at the United States in 1947, a black person could not drink water in a fountain where a white person is drinking. So at the same time, they are the so-called big brother trying to push their foreign policy agenda, while in their own country, a black person was treated as a subhuman.
I mean, even if you are taking the good definition.
Exactly. So it's full of contradiction. Yeah. And that's why I always try to frame like the mentality of the people who made that policy. How can you, as a CIA agent or a State Department official or anyone working for the government doing U.S. foreign policy, going abroad to advance U.S. foreign policy on the African continent full of black people, while in your own country you're treating black people differently? How will you engage?
Calling them naked savages.
You see how the reflection of that, because you were already treating black people in the United States that way, of course you're going to treat Africans the same way, right? So when we frame it that way, beyond the ideological battle between capitalism and communism, there was clear racism into the policy and full of contradiction. Unfortunately, some of our leaders were corrupted by it. I think there is a book that I was reading not long ago, the JFK Ordeals, where I was shocked to, the more I read about, I think his name is Mahoney, the former son of a U.S. ambassador. He wrote a book about JFK, CIA operations here. So one of the pages I'm reading, I'm actually seeing in this book, Ghana mentioned, too, let's say a name that I heard a few times because, I'm not from Ghana and I heard this name, that J.B. Dankwa was on CIA payroll. And that he rushed into the U.S. embassy one time because they had cut his salary. So when I saw that, I said to myself, what is happening to our leaders who go to the United States to sell our land? And then we will say, for example, that these leaders are our leaders and our problem is our leaders. No, we did not tell our leaders to go to the CIA. I don't think any Ghanaian told a Ghanaian leader, go to the CIA to get a salary, and that if you're not going to be paid, you're going to go back to the embassy and ask them, I didn't get my check last week. That is actually in a book written. So that's why I keep going back to the essence of what we as people have to understand about our power, what we can do to change, and so that we make sure our leaders come from us. That way, if our leader try to sell the land, they know we are going to be informed.
These people are not going to take this line down. These people are going to give me a hard time. Let me read this, to support what you said about how they treated, Africans, the contradiction in trying to play Big Brother. And, here it says, the soldiers' pay, that's the African soldiers' pay, was minimal, and they complained of ill treatment, the lack of adequate medical care, insufficient rations, and lack of or bad housing. On discharge, they were paid a meager gratuity. Corporal punishment, not practiced on European troops, was abolished only in May 1946. The widely distributed film of the Victoria Parade in London excluded the contingent of colonial troops who had participated in the parade. So even within the military, even within the troops, look at the way they treated the black troops as against the white troops. Corporal punishment. So you would literally watch a black person get beat up, and a white person wouldn't have to go through that. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. To the extent that we all go through a war, and yet somehow the distributed film of the parade excludes the black troops. Exactly. So even our presence or our involvement was completely obliterated. We did not exist. Like, we just didn't exist. And yet, here we are, giving out money, building roads, building airports for these same people that we...
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. There's something else I wanted to read.
Yeah. That's why we found.
There's something else I wanted to read here. It says, alarmed by the rapid growth of nationalism in Africa and other parts of the British colonial empire, the Colonial Office has been inspiring a campaign designed to brand organizations such as the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, the Nigerian Youth Movement, the United Gold Coast Convention, and the West Africa Youth League as communist-controlled and therefore should be suppressed. The Under-Secretary of State for the Colonies told the House of Commons that the recent rows and shootings on the Gold Coast were instigated by African communists to drive the British out. The campaign is linked with the Truman Doctrine of using African raw materials and manpower to contain Soviet Russia, and in the event of war, turning Africa into strategic bases.
It's quite plain. Yeah. I mean, what I can take though that is positive and it's inspiring to me in what you share. African communists were so feared that they did everything in their power to stop them. But yet today, many African countries are independent. We're still fighting for Western Sahara. by many African countries because of African communists who say we are not afraid to fight for human dignity. We are not afraid to take control of our affairs, and they were successful at it. They laid the foundation. Another thing that's fascinating even about that period is this whole, the colonial borders and the language in between. Because when we're even looking at the Secretariat, we're talking about Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa. So when we're looking at Kwame Nkrumah dealing with people in Benin, dealing with people in Nigeria at the same time, which language was he using? Somehow we were able to communicate and create a common front for independence. How come today, if something is in another language than English or Twi or any local language here, we will say that as foreign? So that should entice us to even reach out more. That they didn't have the resources that we had in 1945 to 48, right? They didn't have those same resources, but they were able to communicate in the local indigenous languages, in the colonial language, be it French and English, that today we must rebuild that. And the beautiful thing is we have a blueprint in this book written by Marika Sherwood and many others.
Absolutely. And today we talk about military bases in Africa. And this issue of military bases goes as far back as the 1940s. The Truman policy involves building bases in Africa. So if we know this as a people, why do we allow for military bases today on the continent?
What did they say? Isn't Terminal 1 no longer Ghanaian?
Terminal 1 has been given out to, what's the name? It's been given out to a Ghanaian. And per what we hear is that the U.S. military base has a share or something in that, but I cannot verify that. And so, like, you raise questions about bases and what our leaders, and when you read some of these books, and one of my favorite books is Dark Days in Ghana. When I read these books, I'm like, what else do we need again? Or who else do we need to tell us that these are our problems? We know our problems, but like he says, most of these problems are things that people benefit from individually. And so when you, even in the book, she goes on to state that there were points where Kwame Nkrumah met political leaders of Ivory Coast and was trying to speak to them. And for them, they were not, they felt, who is this young boy? We're not looking for United West Africa. They were trying to put together all the Francophone West Africans because they wanted to be parts of what the book itself refers to, the book itself refers to as free world. They wanted to be part of the French society, and all those things. And so one of our biggest challenges, again, like he says, I asked myself, how did Nkrumah do it? Because I've read a lot of his books and I never knew him to be someone who speaks French. How was he able to, do this?
It's amazing that you bring in the French situation, assimilation. Correct me, Kambale, you are from
Congo.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that assimilation was on a whole different level. French assimilation, that was on another level. That was worse than colonialism. The Anglophone version, because the French, I understand their policy, and it's also here in this book. You know, I read about it again. I've read about it before, but I read about it again here. That their approach was entirely different. They wanted to assimilate the natives to become Francophone. Let me read something briefly here. It says, in January 1944, Vichy France held a conference of local governors in Brazzaville. The future of the colonies, it was decided, was definitely not independence. After all, the civilizing work being carried out by France in its colonies excludes any idea of autonomy and any possibility for development outside the French imperial bloc. The possible future establishments for self-government in the colonies is, even in the remote future, excluded. Now, they were civilizing the natives. That was the French attitude. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I would call it more indoctrinating.
Because
they were not civilized about what they did. I mean, it was
French
very...
assimilation was on another level.
Yes, I'm in agreement. And I mean, specifically for even the Congo, I would even argue it was worse. Because we were not colonized by the French. We were colonized by the Belgians in the DR Congo. And they had a much worse, where we in the DRC, we look at Congo-Brazzaville and say, well, you all were assimilated with education. They made sure that in DRC, no one was educated. So the way I look at it is different countries had different strategies, but the end result was the total control of the exploitation of the resources, while the native will not be able to wage a war to actually stop the exploitation. And for me, though, the bigger message is, back then, they were able to connect. We've had that connection, even while we talk about what is the African Union doing. Do people realize that Osagyefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, is at the center of even the creation, the founding member of the African Union that we know today, which was the Organization of African Unity, to see that it is possible for us to change. You know, I'm hearing he built over 400 to 700 factories during his time. It's possible to do that if you did it back then. So for us to read what did these young people achieve and say it's not far-fetched for us to actually achieve it. And if we're able to achieve it, let's have our second independence movement. That's what's needed now. The forefathers, foremothers did their work. They fought for political independence. They achieved it. They were going toward economic independence. We haven't achieved economic independence now. We are young like them. Are we going to continue to read books on Kwame Nkrumah before we implement those ideologies? Or are we going to say the ideology of the United States of Africa is possible, under the banner of socialism, is possible, and we see that an institution called the African Union has been created. It's not necessarily everything, right, that they dreamed of, but if they were able to get to this goal, what can we do to do better?
We can further that. We can further that. Our time is up. I'll plead with Hot News team to give me just 3 minutes to read, some of the messages that have come through, because our time is up. This one says, how many ounces of gold did Nanado take to Switzerland? Could someone please help me? This one, his name is Socrates Cicero, and this from Facebook. This one says, I'm watching from Ebri, and they are, Godfrey Edu, okay. He says he's watching from Ebri. There are accidents on the Ebri mountain, so drivers should be careful. Godfrey Edu, sure, we hear you. I just, announced it. This one says, greetings to the panelists, especially my boss, Ninche, my upcoming SRC presidential hopeful. If as a country we only celebrate our leaders without practicing what they stood for, but continue to chase the very people who disvalue whatever comes from Africa, then there's no need we give recognition to Nkrumah and the likes. From our political ambition, economic and social aspects, we see the whites as our earthly god, that the only good thing that can shape the African continent must be of the white man's idea and leadership. African leaders are only local leaders, but foreign slaves to the whites. His name is Anas from the Ghana Institute of Journalism. This one says, please help preach this truth to all Ghanaian youth of today to stop thinking of NDC and MPP, because both of them are a threat. Okay, you didn't tell us your name. I really would have appreciated your name. This one says, I'm enjoying your show, Ama. We are independent, but still indirectly dependent. Ghanaians must rise up to know what belongs to them. His name is Michael Darkon from Dansoman. Thank you so much for that message. Our time is up. I asked for 3 minutes. I just took one. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I mean, we haven't touched on all the themes in the book. There's the Cold War. There's the Cold War. There's imperialism. Today's imperialism. There's so much. Should we continue next week, guys?
We are available.
Great. So we conclude next week on Kwame Nkrumah and the dawn of the Cold War, the West African National Secretariat, 1945 to 1948. It is a book by Marika Sherwood. I recommend it strongly to everybody. Grab a copy, read it. Join us this week when we conclude on this book. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much. Just appear at News. Bye.